You actually got your hands on some of these contracts because most of us can never see what they are. The terms on which China is lending to some sovereigns around the world. What did you learn?
The myth was China lends against infrastructure. China takes over these facilities on the one hand, and the other myth is, China is a benevolent lender that helps development. Well, neither of those is really quite right, and these warring myths are sort of beside the point. What we found was terms that are more aggressive, more muscular than other bilateral official contracts. And more muscular than most commercial contracts. But the difference we found was really a difference of degree. And then there is one clause that we found that is truly unique to Chinese lenders, and that is a promise not to restructure the debt in the Paris Club of government-to-government creditors, or otherwise in these coordinated collaborative restructurings.
Right. So Larry, that goes to you, actually, as former Treasury Secretary. You know the Paris Club well. That's been historically a sort of ad hoc way we work it out when people can't pay their debts. Did it come as a surprise to you that they'd exclude these debt agreements from the Paris Club?
I've learned not to be surprised too often. I think Anna's done hugely important research that moves us beyond ideology to some practicalities. And I think those practicalities are that it's wrong when people go into strong rhetoric about debt trap diplomacy, but at the same time, China isn't completely playing fair vis-a-vis other creditors, and writing clauses into its contract that says that we won't participate in the global multilateral rescheduling processes isn't really fair, and you can't have a system where people go to people who are desperate for money and get them to agree to contracts that one particular category of debt can't ever be restructured. So I think we're going to be in a much more fruitful position to have international dialogue on these matters because of the research that Anna and her many colleagues have done. But look, this is a big deal. We've got more flow of credit across international borders than at almost any point in history. You look at the amount of debt that's carrying junk bond type spreads, and that's telling you that people think that not always that debt's going to get repaid, and sometimes it's going to have to be restructured. And the right time to think about the restructuring of debt is not when we're in extremis, but in advance. And so I think there's going to need to be a lot of soul searching in the international community around these debt issues. And I think that it's going to take time. I think one of the important conclusions of Anna's research is that none of us have a monopoly on virtue, and that some of the practices that people thought of as problematic Chinese practices are also problematic European practices, and maybe even problematic in some cases American practices. And so we just need to work through a system that can work for everybody.
So, Anna, let's pick up on what Larry just said. And you are an expert on sovereign debt, not just Chinese, but in general, sovereign debt. Does it make sense to ask the question, how many of these provisions, muscular you call them, provisions are to protect China as lender as opposed to advance China policies? Or is it inherent in any sovereign debt that, in fact, the sovereign doing the lending is going to try to have their will in things other than just getting repaid?
I think that it's important for us to make sure that countries know what they're getting into, and that there is some sort of a set of norms, and in particular surrounding disclosure. I must say, the one thing that I learned from this project is I really want to see the contract. I don't want to see your summary.
I bet you do.
But, David,
yeah.
there are a set of special features about sovereign debt and policy and all that, but some of this comes back to something that in a way is even simpler. If I'm borrowing to buy a car, I want two things. I want as low an interest rate as possible, And I also want, in the event that I don't pay the debt back, it to be as hard for the lender to repossess the car as possible. And there's some trade-off between those two things. If it's going to be really hard to repossess the car, the lender's going to demand a higher rate. And so you have to think about it both at the beginning in terms of the desire to have lower rates and partway through in the event that things go wrong. And that's really the subtlety in this subject. And to some extent, what China has done is have more aggressive capacity to get itself repaid, and therefore been able to lend at lower rates. And it all feels good at the beginning, but then when things go wrong, it can create an awkward situation for the countries and a very difficult situation for China vis-a-vis the other creditors.
So Larry, finally, let's talk about the underlying structure of what's going on here. These loans are being made as part of this One Belt, One Road project from China that they've been very proud about. Where do you think that stands right now? Have they had to pull back on it because of the pandemic? Is it a success at this point from the Chinese point of view?
I think it's a mixed success. I think on the one hand, it's won China considerable goodwill in many places. I think it's generated access to commodities that are strategic for China. I think it's been a bold thrust with respect to excess capacity they had in the local construction industry. I think on the other hand, the Chinese have learned what the British learned, what the Americans learned, that it is hard to lend money well thousands of miles from home in environments that are still finding their way. And so I think there have been more disappointments, a little less of the efficiency and rapid fire results that were hoped for. So I would guess that it's been a mixed success from the point of view of China. But of course, the Chinese have a system where there's a tendency, to put it mildly, to regard public efforts as having been successful and to celebrate their positive aspects. And I think that would inform any official conversation that one had. But I think they have recognized the need for continuous evolution in their approach.
So Larry, we've been talking about debt and the One Belt, One Road particular project from China. How is China asserting their growing economic power around the world in other places other than through lending?
They're doing it in their very aggressive approaches to marketing technology. They're doing it in the approach they're taking to subsidizing key industries. They're doing it in the spread of global Chinese corporations that are based in China. They're doing it in the rhetoric that comes from the top of their government. At one level, this is a reflection of a variety of specific things about the Chinese economic system. At another level, if you take a country that in a matter of half a human lifespan has gone from being a place where a $10 calculator was a miraculous instrument that children would fight over, to being a place that is leading the world in the many parts of the fintech sector, that a country that had that kind of staggering progress would be asserting itself in all kinds of ways in the global system. It would be much more remarkable if that did not happen than it is that it is happening.